going to kick off episode number 7 of The Bride of Monster Kid Radio with the song White Widow. It's from the band The Langhorns. They're a Swedish surf band, and it comes from their album Showstopper. You can find out more about them over at langhorns.bandcamp.com. When you're done listening to this episode of the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. This is Bride of Monster Kid Radio, and I am your writer, host, and producer, Derek M. Cook. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you here. Thanks for your patience, because we are finally talking about the Phantom Carriage from 1921. We were going to talk about this last week, but, life gets in the way. But not so much in the way that we aren't going to talk about this movie that is set on New Year's Eve for the very first episode, the New Year's episode of Bride of Monster Kid Radio. My wife Beth and I sat down to watch this movie, and then almost immediately afterwards recorded about this movie. So what you're going to hear are our pure, unadulterated, unedited thoughts about the Phantom Carriage. I'm really excited to get into that. So that's going to be coming up later in this episode. We're also going to sneak in an email that we received from Monster Kid Radio irregular Kevin Slick. Before that, though, we've got Mark Natsky's Beta Capsule review. Mark, thank you for knocking it out of the park again. Some more Ultraman Ace action coming up in this episode. We're actually going to get to that right about now.
Hallen's been killed.
Doc Hallen, what happened?
It's over at his place. You gotta come now.
Oh, wait a minute, Steve. Tell us what happened.
Well, I'm trying to tell you. Now, this thing had killed the doc.
Well, what was it?
Stop with it, kid. But it's kind of like a mass that keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Every one of you watching this screen, look out. Because soon, very soon, the most horrifying monster menace ever conceived will be oozing into this theater. Two teenagers see it first, like a falling star from outer space.
Boy, that was close. Hey, come on. I want to see if I can find it.
An old man finds it, touches it, and this is the shocking result. From then on, there's no stopping the blob as it spreads from town to town. It's indestructible. It's indescribable. Nothing can stop it.
This town is in danger.
How can it be stopped? Mob hysteria sweeps one city. Before long, the nation, and then the world could fall before the blood-curdling threat of the Blob.
Starring Steve McQueen and a cast of exciting young people.
Mighty Ursus. Of all the supergiants who ever shook the world, this was the mightiest. No power on earth could stand up to this superhuman until he faced the pagan goddess of the island of sin. Mighty Ursus, spectacular in color.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Ultraman Ace, Episode 21. I saw a vision of the Celestial Maiden. Captain Ryu's dream of a celestial maiden dancing in a rainbow-colored sky gives way to a strange, real-world request. A young woman shows up at his apartment, asking that he hire her as a maid. The captain refuses, as she won't tell him who she is or how she got his address. The mystery girl ends up in the home of a man in his early 20s named Shinichi, and he falls in love with her, resolving to propose to her mere moments before she transforms into terrible monster Aprosarl. The Yapool are behind the monster's appearance. Having saved the Space Maiden from her home planet's destruction, they force her to repay the favor with the command to destroy the Earth. Tak and Ace intervene to confront Aprosarl, but since she's comprised of cosmic rays, neither standard weapons nor hand-to-hand combat works to subdue her rampage. Episode 21, which aired August 25th, 1972, is a neat bit of storytelling in the Ultraman fashion, combining psychedelic and interstellar imagery, imaginative action, and heartfelt emotion. The standout element of I Saw a Vision of the Celestial Maiden is Aprosarl herself, a deliberately feminine monster, fearsome and haunting in terrible monster form, with a tragic backstory. Toward the end of the story, Captain Ryu attempts to console young Shinichi, suggesting that he think of his relationship with Aprosarl as just a summer night's dream. That also works as a description of the episode. It's a dreamlike, ghostly slice of cosmic folklore in a science fiction package. A very, very good standalone installment of Ultraman Ace. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Mansky reporting.
What is it?
I don't know.
Ejected from unexplored secret stratus, this giant, harder than steel piston, disgorges strange creatures, inundating our world, twisting the emotions of women, distorting our men.
This is a piece we got off the mayor. Reflex action like a snake. Cut a snake in half and the two pieces go off in different directions.
These things take over a man's mind. He becomes a robot? A machine taking orders?
Join the hunt for the hiding place of terror. Find the breeding place of these globs of destruction.
In feeding the mouth parts, rupture the cells, convey the food to the stomach by a pumping action.
It's an adventure that'll burst your blood vessels with suspense. See the Brain Eaters.
Tonight's film deals with the supernatural as a possessed man attempts to destroy his family. Although edited for television, it may not be suitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised. Tonight, an ABC premiere presentation. Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, the ultimate exercise in terror.
Anybody here?
A masterpiece of modern horror. The Shining.
Here's Johnny!
This is Count Vlad, but you may recognize me by my more familiar name, Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. In your parlance, you might call these revelations spoilers. You know how the children of the night, monster kids can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned, and don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
Before we talk about the movie, I want to read an email that we got from Kevin Slick. It's not the only email we've gotten from Kevin. There's another email that I'm going to sit on until we need to do a feedback section in another episode that's a little bit more relevant, but this one's specifically about the Phantom Carriage.
Okay, well, what does Kevin have to say?
I'm glad to hear that you and Beth will be watching and talking about the Phantom Carriage. The film is, of course, fascinating on so many levels, not the least of which is the many images that have been utilized by other directors over the years, Stanley Kubrick being the most obvious example. I noticed that the plot is similar to my favorite film of all time, Sunrise, directed by Murnau.
Okay.
Murnau also directed the original Nosferatu.
Right, yeah.
Both feature a man led astray by vices that can destroy not only his life, but those of his family. While the stories might seem overly simplistic, simple life on the farm with wife and the kids equals good. Drinking, gambling, and fast women equals bad. I see them as archetypical storytelling. Often the hero needs only to realize the strength he needs is inside himself and has been there all along, similar to Dorothy's revelation at the end of The Wizard of Oz, now that I think about it. Murnau used the theme of love conquering all in several films, certainly in Faust, and you can see it in Nosferatu as well. Victor, and I'm going to mispronounce the name, Sjöström?
That's not bad, actually.
It is working with a simple theme that resonates to this day, perhaps because it is simple and can be identified with by many people. Most importantly, though, is the fact that he used this simple second chance allegory to create a stunning film. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the movie. Did you watch it on New Year's Eve? Signed, Kevin. And you can find more about Kevin at his website at kevinslick.com. He's also one of the guys wearing an orange polo at Monster Bash, as he's there every year helping out.
Well, watch for him.
Yeah, definitely. Victor S.
You realize now I'm just going to be at Monster Bash like a normal human and suddenly going to scream Kevin across the hall because I'll just be like, orange shirt. Oh my gosh. Kevin, yeah, you've done this to yourself, man. I apologize in advance.
They all wear orange polos. That's how we know they're staff. So it's not just...
Oh, well, this is going to be a lot of screaming for me then.
So Victor S. is the director, but he's also the star of this.
Have they tried name tags?
Do they? It's been too long since I've been. I'll have to go back to double check.
Lanyards. I suggest lanyards if you don't want, because I am so loud when I start screaming, guys. Like, give me a good scary movie all day long. Anyway, yes, Victor Sjöström. Think like a Z for an SJ, because the J is really a Y.
Okay.
And then the O has the umlaut, like we used to have on Cook, but we don't use anymore.
Sure.
To make it more
Okay. He's the director and star. He actually played David in this as well.
I suspected that's what was going on. I think I was too busy in the title sequence trying to read the character descriptions in Swedish. I don't speak or read Swedish, just for the record, but I speak and read German. I read German quite well, much better than I speak it. And Swedish. Basically, I was once told by a German teacher that Swedish is basically just like German pronounced badly with a high Russian accent.
Yes.
Yeah.
We did watch the Criterion release of the film. So it had that score on there. I'm not sure who did the score. I can go back and double check, but a lot of it was very kind of droning and just kind of added to the atmosphere. I'm sure that's not the original accompaniment that was intended for the film, if there even was an intended accompaniment for the film when it came out in 1921.
You know, I really enjoyed that, though. And to call back to an earlier segment we did on a silent movie when we went to the Orpheum here locally, I really enjoyed a lot of the use of percussion and, non-standard instrumentation in this one, just like I did then. I mean, look, we all love a good rollicking Keystone Cop silent movie with the piano jangling away and everybody dancing in their seat. But this isn't that kind of movie at all. At all, you know, the morality tale. There are all kinds of political leanings and issues going into this, which we'll touch on as we get more into depth here. There's some dark stuff.
It really...
Before we get too into it, I'm just going to throw trigger warnings for anybody who might be sensitive to discussions of substance abuse or suicide or the death in general. I mean, most of you are monster kids, so you're going to be okay, but that's fair to warn people.
I think so, too. Now, before we get into the movie itself, no, we did not watch it on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, but pretty darn close.
It's our first episode of the year.
It is, yeah. So, I mean, it kind of counts. And in truth, we were going to watch it sooner, but we had some things happen last week. We weren't able to get to it. So, yeah, still the first episode of the year. I still think it counts. I don't have a lot of experience with this movie. I've never seen it before. It was the first time watch for both of us. Doing a little bit of research, I know that it's very well regarded. It has been cited as an influence on Stanley Kubrick when it comes to The Shining. For example, I do know that it was named like the best horror movie of 1921 by Paste Magazine, or is that a website? Either way, they gave it some pretty high acclaim there. It's been noted as like the most important Swedish silent film in various places, the best Swedish horror film by FLM, which is a Swedish film magazine, which, I mean, it's got a lot of props. But I'd never seen it. And I know Kevin has talked about it before, and I have shown it on the stream in the past on the Twitch channel, but I've never sat down to actively watch it other than to make sure it's running okay. What about you?
I'd never seen it before. I've heard of it, heard good things about it, but never seen it. So this was definitely a first viewing for me. And I'm pretty sure all the actors are first viewing for me. I don't know that I recognize anyone from anything else I've seen, even having watched quite a bit of European older movies. But no, I was great. I was really impressed on many different scores in the way that this was put together, from film to acting to costuming to lighting. I really, really enjoyed some of the lighting choices. And then I suppose the music that we heard, or the background we heard, is an after effect, but I can see where with the right dramatic music behind it, this would have been a very spooky, very chilling thing to watch flicker on the screen in a time when movies were just beginning.
And that's something that I was really fascinated by too, is that when you think about silent movies, I think sometimes you get a couple of stereotypes. You mentioned the plinking keyboard piano stuff.
Yeah.
But you also think a lot about the lack of quote unquote sophisticated camera technique that it took. And
there were a lot of stationary cameras early on.
They were big and heavy.
They were big and heavy, and they had to figure out how to make dollies and things to move them. That was all part of the creation of Hollywood and all important. So the fact that more was done with this is really cool. I think also in the acting, a lot of silent movies, at least in my experience, are very, you must pay the rent. I can't pay the rent. You must pay the rent. I can't pay the rent. And it kind of goes on like that.
Very broad.
Very broad, very overdramatic. Oh my gosh, there's a really bad version of Pride and Prejudice that's a silent movie where they are in, for some godforsaken reason, Civil War era dresses. The hoops just never end, and the drama is almost hilarious because every time a character throws themselves dramatically, they go one way and their butt goes the other way. With that hoop skirt, So yeah, I really appreciated the little bit more subtle acting here, that it wasn't totally overdone. I mean, a drunk guy's gonna stumble and fall, and that can be big and funny and everything, but the dramatic, more serious actors weren't overdoing it. I felt like, and I think in early days of Hollywood, you saw a lot of that because a lot of your actors were coming out of the stage and stuff.
Vaudeville in particular, that kind of broad kind of.
Yeah, that real broad, big, playing to a tall house, which I can say from being on stage, it's one thing to play to a long house where people sit way out in the distance. That's one level of energy, but when you have to project everything up 30 feet in the air and to the back, that's a whole different level of performance that you have to put on. And in fact, if you ever want to get like Broadway Across America tickets, don't buy the front row because you'll be so disappointed at how hideous the makeup is and how overacted everything is because they're reaching the people in the back in the second balcony.
Yeah.
And for some reason, you wanted to get spit on in the front row. They don't do that in this. And I'm really impressed from the Salvation Army sisters to every character really felt like someone who thought through their part, thought through their role, and really understood the assignment.
Yeah, I'm really interested in how true of an adaptation it is because it's based on a novel.
Okay.
And I'm curious as to how much of that got translated or brought over because I know, especially in early days of Hollywood, and I know this isn't Hollywood, but early days of Hollywood, you would have an adaptation that maybe had a 5% similarity to the source material sometimes. So I'm curious about this because there's a lot of messaging in this. And I wonder how much of that came from the novel versus what came from the filmmakers.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. Having actually knowing just a little bit about the novel, what would you say the number one thing that this movie was warning your everyday average Swede about?
Don't drink, man.
That is not what the novel's about.
Okay.
The novel was written as a means of public education against tuberculosis, which was raging through Northern Europe at the time. Everything post-World War I, we had mass cases of TB, and they called it consumption. Anybody that's ever heard of their grandparents or great-grandparents died of consumption or something, that's what they're talking about. And in colder, wet areas like Sweden, once you contracted it, it was an eventual death sentence. And so the original novel is actually warning about consumption.
Okay.
They threw the drinking thing in the film more as another thing that people should avoid. Because, of course, when the novel was written in 1912, the Swedish government wasn't doing certain things yet that it started doing after 1920. But we'll get into that later. What else do you got about this?
Well, that's what I was thinking. It felt very much at home in Prohibition America to me.
Okay. Well, then, yeah, you know what? We'll get into it. Are you aware of the Sami people?
No.
So the Sami people, Sami, is usually how it's spelled in English, are the indigenous people of the Viking regions, if you will, of the northern regions inside the Arctic Circle.
Okay.
So not down in Denmark. We're talking way up where the reindeer live. They're actually the indigenous reindeer herders.
Okay.
That's what a lot of the people are, and the nomads. I can appreciate some of that. Some of my own ancestors being nomadic and raising, livestock for that purpose. And in the 1920s, once World War I had ended, one of the things that the governments in Norway and Finland and Sweden all did was to start cracking down on indigenous people. Now, this was happening all over the world and had been happening throughout the 1800s, of course. But one thing that they wanted was to educate the children and to Christianize them.
Okay.
And naturally, as a part of keeping warm, and no one who's ever watched any show or movie about Vikings will be surprised at this, drinking was a part of Sami culture.
Sure.
Not as an obsessive, over-the-top, addictive thing, but just as it's really cold out here on the ice with the reindeer, and we'd like to keep warm. Well, fishing or whatever.
Yeah.
And things like, fermented reindeer milk and goat's milk and things like that, that are traditional dishes. And so part of this film, of the making of this film, which, as most films in that time had subsidization from the government, was as a point to try to curb drinking in the population. And specifically, if you look, your your savior character, the Phantom driver, who is this guy he knew, is a very Swedish-looking gentleman. He has the very long face. He has the white hair that's straight and it sticks straight up. He has the beard. He has the very Swedish look to him of the broad open shoulders and everything. And then your director is a little bit shorter, and he's much more burly and kind of mean looking, and he has curly hair, and he has dark hair and dark eyes, and he kind of leans over forward in a mean way. That's a representation of a Sami person versus a standard Swedish person. And so it's a bit of a white savior complex, if you will. But for the era, that makes sense.
It does.
It absolutely does. In fact, so the movie was made in 1920, released on New Year's Day in 1921.
Mm-hmm.
In 1922, the Swedes set up a state agency for race and genetic peer. There's for all the good things in it, and I do want to extol all of those, and that in no way demeans all of the hard work that people did on the film or the good things that they did. There is a bit of a morality tale in there that's tied in very much to Christian Western philosophy good, other pagan philosophy bad.
Yeah, and I could totally see that. There's also a big through line through this about repenting, being a good person, pray to God for this, pray to God for that. The Salvation Armies being...
played a huge part.
Yeah, being propped up. I am just now noticing here that in 1922, it did get released here in the States, and it was re-edited. That the Phantom Carriage myth isn't really introduced until about halfway through the movie.
Interesting.
And I'm wondering how that would play. It was called The Stroke of Midnight at that time, when it was released here in the U.S. I don't know if I necessarily want to go back and... I don't know if I can go back and see it that way, if it's available anywhere that way.
True.
But that's really interesting. Granted, I haven't explored the Criterion release too much. I know there's a commentary track on it. I haven't really dug too much deeper. Criterion usually does a pretty good job, so maybe it's on there. I don't know. I'd have to check. But yeah, there is definitely a big, strong, especially during the second half of the film, from like parts 4 on, about religion being...
give yourself to Jesus and also stop drinking.
Yeah, definitely stop drinking, and don't cough in people's faces if you've got TB.
Well, I mean, they kept the message in there.
Yeah.
They just didn't make it the number one message.
Yeah, it's still there. It's still there. I had no idea what to expect going into this. In fact, when it first started, my brain immediately went to Darby O'Gill and the Little People because of the Banshee at the end, and I love that movie. It's one of my favorite Disney movies that I keep wanting to talk about someday. You're on the show, in fact. But my brain went to that with the whole carriage thing, and you take away the souls of the dead and all that. I did like the way that was portrayed on screen. A relatively simple effect nowadays. I don't know if it was considered simple to accomplish back then, but that double exposure...
it was done really well. He lined up really well.
Yeah.
I'd say there was only one time in the entire film where I felt like the size was off a little.
Yeah, you said something about the scale.
When we see the carriage going through some waves, and I think it's just hard to get the scale correct with the waves and the rocks. But it's also hard to tell how big the rocks are, to be fair.
But that shot, that sequence, though, to me was one of the most impressive as well, because one, you've got the carriage in water, which is something I hadn't even considered. And two...
I know. It was like, oh, they can go in water? Oh, cool.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And the second thing that really caught my attention there, and I don't know if this was intentional, because I don't think I noticed it being done this successfully elsewhere in the movie, but at one point, the carriage does seem to go behind one of the rocks in the ocean. And there are other moments throughout the film where Death and our main character, when they're double exposed, when they go behind something, you can still see them superimposed on top. Whereas in this shot, it seemed like the rock blocked their view. So it wasn't just putting two images on top of each other. They probably didn't use the matting technology, but it felt like maybe a mat was put in place, and it just looked really cool.
Yeah.
This was really neat. And a lot of times when you think about doing double exposures like this, you just think about the XY axis. There is a lot of Z-axis in this, where they were coming to and from the camera as well.
Well, and to not only have the double exposure with moving water, but also underwater.
That was cool.
That was sick. That was awesome.
That was really neat. Yeah. There is some pretty intense stuff in this. Beth already mentioned it. There is a suicide that takes place. We don't see the actual moment. We see right before and we see right after.
Yeah.
Being of the era, we don't see like somebody's brain split out all over the floor or whatever, but you do see that he had a gun. I was kind of shocked by that. And I don't know what the rules were in Sweden. This would definitely have been pre-code here in the US in terms of what you can and cannot show on screen. If this had come out during the Hays Code, I doubt we would have had that sequence.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not. It is worth noting that some of the Nordic countries do have really high suicide rates and have been battling that really for a couple hundred years, not just in a modern sense. So I think it makes sense for the placement of the film in the time, but I don't think a U.S. film, and I would wonder if the adaptation for the U.S. maybe cuts that out or plays it a different way or something.
Yeah, maybe. And this isn't me trying to be funny, but massive vitamin D deficiencies.
No, they're true, and they don't have the redheads that can make it themselves. It's it's a problem.
Yeah.
You know that, right? Us mutants make our own vitamin D.
Yep. Oh, I know. I know all about.
But I much prefer the actual vitamin D from the sun.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know where we.
Oh, I love getting Derek off track. But okay, actresses. What did you think about our lead sister?
Sister Edith?
Yes.
Edith or Edit? I thought she was okay. She was good in what she had to do.
I did think she was good at what she had to do as far as her acting and things like that. The one thing I'm going to call out, and again, this may just be a new to movie, issue. I would not have bought her as a consumptive.
Okay.
She just was much too healthy and flush and plump and in the scenes where she was supposed to be dying. That I was not. I was like, come on, hollow her cheeks a little with some makeup or something. Make her look a little sicker. They kept her pretty beautiful for someone dying of consumption.
Yeah, I agree with you that I didn't think she was sick. In fact, I think I even made a comment while we were watching the movie, what is about to happen to her? Because I thought the way it was being set up, and even the postmodern score kind of implied something bad was about to happen. And you said, well, she's dying of consumption. It's like, oh yeah, I guess she is, huh? Because they didn't, I feel like it wasn't presented.
They don't say it straight out at the beginning.
Yeah.
But it is presented. Yeah.
But otherwise, I thought she was okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think the lack of appearing to be stricken with TB, I wouldn't necessarily assign that to her. I also wouldn't assign to her this man I love. I have to see this man I love. Lady, you fixed his coat and saw him twice in the past year.
Okay, with that, I have a call out on that.
Okay.
That's the fault of the translator for your subtitles.
And I wondered about that too.
Because I'm looking at the word every time she's saying, the man I love. And what she's saying, and I don't know that at least in German, I know there's a way that you differentiate. And so I'm guessing in Swedish there is, because again, very similar common roots for the languages. You can say I deeply care about somebody without saying I love them. Like best friend love?
Yeah.
Does that, or that I'm morally responsible for the caring of?
Yes.
Does that feel, I think that's a little more what they were saying, but there's just not a great English translation. So some lazy person went, the man I love. She doesn't mean romantically in any way.
Absolutely not. So I just thought
person I love might actually be a better translation to get over the idea that it's not about him being a man.
Okay. Yeah, that would have worked better, I think, for me.
This is a human I care about.
Yeah.
That I'm responsible for, that I need to still repent to.
Right. And he did make that promise. Oh, yeah, I'll see you in a year. And you're like, well, the bargain's been made.
Oh, as soon as he said that, I go, bargain is struck, man. The fairies got you.
Yeah. So, this movie is old enough that I don't feel like we're spoiling it by talking openly about some of the things that happen here. But it is something that I don't think a lot of monster kids do talk about. So I don't want to get too into the step-by-step story beat There is a very Christmas Carol-y vibe, especially in the back half of the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Back third, maybe.
Their main character is a ghost dragging him around.
Yeah, ghost dragging him around.
I don't think that's a spoiler too much.
You made a comment, though, about the story within a story within a story.
After about the third time we regressed into another look back, or, I was going, what in the Scheherazade is this?
Can you explain that? Because it took me a second to catch up.
So the ancient Arabian tales or Persian tales of Scheherazade, where she's telling a story to the king, and basically he wants her to finish the story, and then he'll decide if he's going to kill her or not. So she just keeps leaving him hanging every night with, but that's a story for another. And then they but that's a story for another night. And then the next night she goes into the next story, and that's how she keeps herself alive until he falls in love with her and marries her. But in this case, that there's no falling in love and marrying.
No, there's like a rediscovery of love or devotion, at least, or dedication. Yeah, I did struggle a little bit when we were into the second Inception level of storytelling here. I met a man who was usually jolly named George. And then we talk about how we met George, and then George starts to tell his story, and we start to go into that story.
Like, how many times we're going to go back in the past here?
Yeah,
we're in the 1700s by the time we're...
Is this a perspective violation, which is something I've talked about on the podcast in the past, or is it just the way the story is being built and presented? And it is early days in film, so we're still experimenting. We're still trying to figure out what works. I loved the direction and the editing in terms of the filmmaking, the early days of filmmaking here. The director of this is noted as like a early pioneer of continuity editing. And there's a lot of back and forth, which here in the States, we attribute a lot of that pioneership to filmmakers like D.W. Griffith.
Okay, yeah.
Who, yes, the content of Birth of a Nation is abhorrent, but on a technical level, it was pretty impressive. I actually recommend people check out his movie Intolerance instead of Birth of a Nation, which in my mind is a superior film and does even more of these amazing things. I think I might even own it on DVD.
Oh.
It's really good, and it's all over the map in terms of when it takes place and stories within stories within stories. Kind of almost Cloud Atlas-like in terms of starting a story, starting another story, going back to this story, and hey, it's a new one. But anyway, there is some back and forth, which does kind of serve to ratchet up the tension a little bit and the suspense, especially at the end when he is returned and is trying to make amends and is trying to stop the wife from doing something terrible. We're at him, we're with her, we're back to him, we're back to her, we're back to him getting back to where he needs to be, and now does he have time to get to her? Just this kind of ratcheting up of tension, and I thought that was pretty impressive. 1921 filmmaking, 1920 filmmaking, where there's not a lot of filmmaking experience in the world, let alone other than Hollywood, or I guess in this case, New Jersey, where a lot of silent films were made. But
yeah,
I thought it was really cool. And I need to watch more silent films. I mean, I like watching silent movies. They do engage a different part of my brain. And it
definitely. Yeah, it's definitely. I will say one thing I really like that they did in this one that I think falls away in other silent films. You don't see it necessarily as much. Sometimes you can tell what they're saying in a silent film.
Yeah.
Certain words, certain big exclamations. They didn't stop talking just because they weren't saying the lines. The lines that we get in caption are great, but we can still assume that there's other little chit-chat and things going on, and we don't necessarily need that caption, but it's still happening, so it made the world feel real. In some silent films, everyone is so quiet in the background and not moving their mouth and not doing the normal things you would do that it feels a little stilted or unnatural.
Well, and I think that goes back to where the performers and the creators came from. Film acting was not viewed as a reputable occupation.
No, not early on, no.
It's where you went if you could have come on the stage.
Yeah.
So in a lot of early silent films, especially the short ones before they started making multi-reel films or feature-length films, feel like they're just recording or filming a stage play where the camera sits in one place and you've got characters entering stage left, exiting stage right. And they're not talking, they're just barely props, unless they actually have something to say. This one did feel a little bit more naturalistic than a lot of silent films that I've seen in the U.S. from this era. I would say, though, in terms of like comparing it to other silent films that I have seen from Europe, I'd put it right up there with Nosferatu or Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, The Golem.
Wow.
In terms of its sophistication of storytelling.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. With sophistication, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of what they were trying to do. Is this a horror movie?
Ooh.
This is something that I was struggling with about halfway through. I know we've got death walking around as an entity in a phantom carriage. Somebody does die and they are visiting places as an unseen spirit.
I think I'm going to say yes, and here's why. Both for the era.
Okay.
I think it plays as a horror movie. I think it would have been frightening to audiences at the time.
Okay.
And certainly there are things we can go back now and look at movies from even the 50s or the 60s and go, okay, that's not actually scary. We're actually cracking up when the monster comes on because we love them so much. But it's not horrifying to us the way it may have been to the audiences then.
Okay.
I watched The Blob to have a good time. Teenagers in the 60s went and watched The Blob to scream and be horrified and cuddle next to their boyfriend and that sort of thing. It was meant to create horror in its audiences at the time. And so if it does that, I think it earns its place as a horror film. The other reason I think it earns its place is that despite the rampant Bible bashing of Christianity throughout the thing, it admits to the supernatural. It's a very Protestant take at this whole thing, because it still admits to like witchcraft and the supernatural, and there could still be a death carriage coming for you. Woo!
I love that myth, by the way, that the idea that the last person to die before the end of the year becomes the person who is responsible for driving,
for ferrying souls,
for being the Phantom Carriage driver for the following year.
Yeah.
Until the next person dies. And that's basically the setup for this. As we learn the myth of the Phantom Carriage, our main character becomes next in line.
Yeah.
And he's trying to get out of it and is being shown all the reasons why he doesn't get to go anywhere other than become a Phantom Carriage driver. I don't think they ever flat out say until the very end that there is an alternative for where people can go.
Yeah, they don't make it clear till the end that's just not where everyone goes. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, so the carriage is not the good place, huh?
Yeah, when our good sister...
I mean, I'm assuming the nun is going, or the sister's going to the good place. I'm just gonna...
And that's
maybe not. Maybe she's got skeletons. I don't know, but...
that's what I was about to say, is that when the sister's about to pass, the carriage driver was like, we gotta go because other people are coming for her.
Yeah, this ain't our job.
Suddenly, now it's divided, and it's not just everybody who dies takes a carriage ride. Just certain people.
It does make me feel a little better because the way that the carriage driver lumped those guys into the back of the carriage, I didn't want the poor sister to get thumped back into the carriage.
Yeah. But I did really like that. I do agree with you. What did the poor horse do? Why is the horse...
It says a different carriage driver every year, but always the same horse and carriage. And I'm like, what did the horse do? Maybe write in with what you think the horse did.
Yeah, I like that. So,
keep it clean.
Since this is in the public domain, I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. But like I said, Criterion did release it as well. I don't know if it's currently in print. Criterion has a habit of yanking a lot of their product eventually, either because they lose the license or whatever. But for this one, I can't imagine they lose maybe they lose the license for any bonus material, or commentary tracks. I don't know, but it is public domain, so should be able to get your hands on it pretty easily.
Go crazy.
Yeah, I would recommend this one.
I really would. It's a fun one. It's a different one, but it's a fun one, and there are good places to take a quick break for the bathroom, nice places to pause, very clear sections, so...
It's broken up into parts.
So yeah, if you're older like us and can't make it through a whole movie without a snack or a break.
I just need to get a cup of coffee because it does engage different muscles.
Yes.
You know, I couldn't...
A little more thinking than Godzilla.
Yeah. And I love my Godzilla movies, but that might even be a bad example because I prefer them subtitled. But if I'm watching The Blob, you know, I can get up and go to the kitchen and make a cup of coffee because I can still hear the world's oldest teenager yelling at the police. You know, I can hear Steve McQueen doing his thing. In this one, I got to be able to see what's being said. I got to see those intertitles.
15-year-old with a 5 o'clock shadow.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you don't, in this case, you didn't know where the subtitles were coming.
Yeah.
Because they talk, and you'd be like, and then the subtitle would come up, and at first in English it would go, no, and it'd be like 40 words. And then it would come up with more.
Yeah.
But it was pretty funny at times.
Yeah. But I would recommend it. I do think it's horrific enough. Is it a monster movie? Well, I mean, you got Death walking, or he serves death. Somebody who represents death walking around. So I guess technically, but it's definitely a genre picture. And I think definitely an important picture. I mean, it influenced even Steven. Well, maybe it influenced certain Stevens, but it did definitely influence Stanley Kubrick, Ingmar Bergman, and others. So.
Oh, yeah, I can see. Well.
Bergman's got death as well as a character on this.
And a particular horror film that was filmed up just outside of Portland.
Well, that's why I said...
With a particular axe.
That's why I said...
Yeah, there's that scene.
And that's all over YouTube. In fact, when he grabs the axe, first of all, it seemed a little silly that he had an axe in what was basically the washroom. But he grabbed the axe and goes out to the door, and you're like...
They got a 2-room apartment. Where do you want him to keep it? Under the table?
But as soon as you said, here's Johnny, when he grabbed the axe, it's like, you laugh, but...
But here we go, and then he goes at the door, and I'm like, no, it's all wood. And it's a wood door. It takes him a while to get...
Yeah.
It makes you wonder when they were filming their obvious jumps, if they started hacking and going, man, this is really hard to hack through.
Well, hey, man, he was the director, so it's like, he chose this.
Well, whether it's directing, acting... I'm sure he made choices in editing. He can definitely hack it with me, and I think The Phantom Carriage is one well worth watching for any of our monster kids.
I agree with you 100%. I think it's something that needs to be seen, and are you aware that there is a remake?
Yes, 50s, I think.
I don't know anything about it either because I didn't know anything about this going into it, but I'm curious if Kevin had seen it since he's the one that has championed this in the past for me.
Okay, Kevin, have you seen the remake?
Or if anybody had
or anyone.
The remake. It was remade in, I'm trying to find it here, 1939, called The Phantom Wagon, and it was French. It was a French film.
Oh.
So I'm curious as to how that holds up or compares or any changes they might have made in that one. But it might be something worth taking a look at. It was something that didn't get a lot of screen time from what I understand. There was that whole Second World War thing happening, so the French releasing films to worldwide.
Well, you know, I mean, the French.
Yeah. But I'm curious. I'll add it to the to-watch list. But this one definitely... I don't want to give it a rating because we don't do ratings here, but...
It tickled my spooky bone, I'll say that.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of The Bride of Monster Kid Radio. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thanks for checking out the show, and thanks in advance for sharing the show, retweeting the show, and just spreading the word about what we do here at Bride of Monster Kid Radio. Beth and I have so much fun putting this show together. This is a real treat, and I'm really honored that you've chosen to spend some time with us, doubly honored that Beth has chosen to become so much a part of the show, so much so that as soon as we got done recording about the Phantom Carriage, I asked her flat out, well, I don't know what we're doing next week. What do you think we should do? And she looked at me, smiled, and said, "We haven't talking about Nosferatu yet, so you know what? We might be a few weeks late, but that's okay. It's still playing in the movie theaters. We're going to check out the new version, the remake of Nosferatu next week on the show." Now, I know last week I did play a voicemail from Captain Billy where he shared his thoughts about Nosferatu. I'd like to hear from the rest of you, so we would love for you to call in to our voicemail line and let us know what you think of the new movie, the new version of Nosferatu. Our voicemail line is 360-524-2484. If you'd rather send us an email, you can do that too, monsterkidradio@gmail.com, and I'll include your thoughts in next week's show. Let's set a deadline, though. I do need to have that material in by Friday night, Friday, January 10th, so that I can put it into the production of Bride of Monster Kid Radio number 8. So that'll be coming up next week. Nosferatu, that'll be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that. You can find out everything you need to know about the podcast over at our website, which is monsterkidradio.net. You're going to find links to all of our contact information. Again, that's monsterkidradio@gmail.com, or call us or send us a text at 360-524-2484. You're also going to find links to various social media platforms for the podcast: Facebook, Twitter. We are going to have a Blue Sky here soon. We've got Reddit, we've got Discord, which I'm kind of reconfiguring, that sort of thing. Just make sure you go to monsterkidradio.net sometime in the month of January, because I'm going to be making some changes to the various links, and you'll be able to follow along with us outside of the podcast on various social media platforms. I'd love to get some conversations happening elsewhere online and just kind of spread the word, kind of let more people know about what we do here at Bride of Monster Kid Radio. Really appreciate all the support you've given us thus far. I've had a blast in 2025 already, and I know we're only one episode in, but so many big plans for Bride of Monster Kid Radio. You're going to learn more about that probably by the end of the week through a Patreon video that I'm going to be making available to everybody. You don't have to be a patron to get this video. Just make sure you check out patreon.com/monsterkidradio by the end of next weekend, and you'll be able to see that video where we talk about things that are coming up this year for the podcast. Bride of Monster Kid Radio is a Team Death production. All original content of Bride of Monster Kid Radio is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 Unported license. You can learn more about Team Death, our other projects like Death Designs, Mail Order Zombie, the Team Death YouTube channel, and more at www.teamdeath.com. Remember, death is spelled D-E-T-H. All previous episodes of this podcast, as well as the original Monster Kid Radio podcast, are available at www.monsterkidradio.net. Please rate and review Bride of Monster Kid Radio wherever you download your favorite podcasts. White Widow is copyright 2024. The Langhorns, they're a surf band based out of Sweden, and the song White Widow appears on their album Showstopper. You can find them online at langhorns.bandcamp.com. Check out the album Showstopper and the rest of their releases as well, of course. You can also find out more about them over at langhorns.com or look them up on Facebook. Make sure you let them know that you heard about them here on Bride of Monster Kid Radio. My name's Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week. Ciao.